Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another episode of the Rattlecast. This is episode number 64. Our special guest today is David Mason, all the way from Tasmania, Australia. We'll just get to him in just a bit. But first, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. And if you like poetry as much as we do, please click the like button or share, click the bell. I think now both Facebook and YouTube have a bell, so click that. If you're watching after the fact, especially on iTunes, give us a rating. Give us a like on, I think it's likes on SoundCloud, on Stitcher. I think there's a rating system. There's either a rating or a like or some kind of button wherever you're listening to this, whenever you're listening to this. So please do click on that when you can. Now, for the warm-up poem today, the mail just came. Or actually, I just got the mail, I should say, which I don't do as often as I used to in the COVID days. And the new Pushcart Prize anthology came in the mail, the best of the small presses. And I just love the Pushcart Prize. Look at how thick this is. This is, if you've never read a Pushcart Prize anthology, it is worth your $19.95. You should check it out. We have two poems in the Pushcart this year, 2001. And I thought I would read as the warm-up poem one of them. This is A Town Somewhere by Ted Kooser. And I asked Ted if he could be on the show, and he said he wished he could, but I guess he's having some vocal trouble. And maybe in the future he might be on the show, but he hasn't been yet. The other poem in here is by John Philip Johnson, who was on the show back in the spring. So you can go check out his Rattlecast and read his poem back then. But since Ted can't be on, I thought we would share that poem as the warm-up poem today. This is A Town Somewhere by Ted Kooser. Here we go. A Town Somewhere. I'd like to find it for you, but I can't. You might not like it anyway. It's quaint and pretty in an old, worn way, quite near to me at times. But then it's gone, impossible to find. I've been there always, but I haven't been, if you can understand. It's a town that I remember in sweet detail that was never. It would be simple to find someone to love. It's so open there. Whenever there's a fence around a stand of flowers, bachelor's buttons, there's a gate with a hook and eye latch that a finger can lift. And whenever you see shutters framing windows, they're decorations only, for they shut out nothing. Those windows are Windex clean too, sprayed and wiped with wads of inessential news. If you peer deep into the liquid shadows, careful to avoid stirring the surface, you might see a figure rising, as if to take a breath of what's beyond, looking out at you above a sill of potted violets. Was she the person you might love? She's gone. And even as I call up the town for you, I feel it darken. Sundown. A dog is in the distance barking and barking, as if aware that we'd been there, just passing through, leaving no more than a scent on the wind where no one was or seemed to be. And there's A Town Somewhere by Ted Kooser from the new Pushcart anthology, which I recommend everybody pick up. There's some wonderful short stories as well as poetry in there and nonfiction too. So do pick up the Pushcart Prize anthology. I'm sure with bookstores being in trouble these days, they might be having sales trouble, so go to their website and pick up a copy of the Pushcart Prize anthology. And of course, Ted Kooser was the Poet Laureate of the United States back in, 10 years ago or so. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Delights and Shadows, and among many other great books. And we interviewed him in Rattle number 30. So check out any of that if you would. Now, this week's guest, as I mentioned, is David Mason. And David was born in Colorado. It's been all over the world, really. His two poems in the current issue of Rattle, and he has a book, The Sound, new and selected from Red Hen Press, and a forthcoming manuscript, Pacific Light, among many other books. He's won just too many prizes to name. I'm not even going to bother with all this stuff, but here he is, David Mason. Hey, David, how you doing today?
I'm well, Tim. It's great to see you. Welcome to Tasmania.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you. Do you want to start us out with a poem, just to get things going?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to give you a little welcoming poem. It's the first poem from a book called Sea Salt. It's called Kefi. Every meal a communion. The uninvited dead are here. Do they miss the taste of wine or the flickering glare of the candle in the window? I remember some of their names. Their appetites are hollow. They crowd like moths to the flame, but the poor things cannot burn. Lightheaded in this company, I look at them all in turn. The Greeks would call this kefi, ineffable, weightless, tuned to the conversations of the night, with or without a moon. Everything's all right. It's kefi. Coffee would wreck it, or too much wine. But a song, if we can remember it, will carry us along.
Yeah, I love that poem, and that last line, especially, a song, if we can remember it, will carry us along. And of course, songs, carry you along and carry us all along as fans of poetry. I'm curious about your life and how you started in poetry. You grew up in Colorado, but then left and went to Alaska, and was a fisherman there on one of those boats out in the ocean, I imagine, right?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a little bit different in that I was actually born in Washington State, which is 40-odd degrees north latitude, and now I live in Tasmania, which is 40-odd degrees south latitude. So there's a rhyme in my life between north and south, between the two hemispheres. Where I grew up in Bellingham, Washington, under the Canadian border, both my parents were from Colorado, so the Colorado connection goes back quite a ways. But I grew up with a kind of international focus, a border focus, and I never felt naturally an American. I always felt something of an internationalist. I had deep roots in Colorado, deep roots in the American West, but the Northwest, where I grew up, was very much culturally aligned and geopolitically aligned with Japan and Asia, and it was perfectly natural for a kid in my circumstances to spend time in Alaska fishing and doing other things. And so all of these things are connected. I'm descended from Scottish immigrants, coal miners, etc., and I've written a lot about that. And that's why I think the British Isles and Scotland mean a lot to me. I lived in Greece for some years and speak Greek and love the Greek people and the Greek language. And so that's been a huge part of my life. And all of these things foster literary connections, foster the way I understand English. And they're all here in Tasmania as well.
So what is it, do you think? I always think of your poems as sort of poems of place almost, because there's sort of a sense of like, I'm in this body inhabiting this space that has a history. And it stretches back, and I'm connected to it. I'm not like apart from it. Yeah. And that's sort of what I get, that sense of being connected through your poems. Yeah. And but you go from place to place, though. You don't stay rooted in one place, it seems. But why do you think that is? Like, what is your, what are you like seeking? Because there must be a seeking there, right?
Well, yeah, there's a bit of accident rolled into it too. But, you're putting your finger on the essential paradox of my life, I think, in that I'm very much a poet of place, very much a poet of weather, seasons, location, language. But I'm also a poet of deracination, rootlessness, vagabondage, immigration, etc. The verse novel I published, Ludlow, is about immigrants, some of whom have this strange feeling that they don't even really exist, that their language is unreal, that their identity is double, that they're more than one thing. I've never in my life ever felt that identity was one thing, a knowable, solid thing. It always felt fluid to me. It always felt like something in motion. Now, you can think of all that wandering and that movement as a kind of purgatorial aspect to my life, but I don't think of it that way. I seem to be somebody who feels at home wherever he is. And that's a great gift from my point of view. Right now, I'm enjoying a life where I'm not moving at all, and I look forward to not ever moving again, if I can possibly swing it. I feel deeply rooted here. I love this place, and it mirrors in a way the place where I grew up. And so I'm damn lucky to have a place where I can nest at last, where I can alight at last.
And what is Tasmania like? I've never, it's the island, at the southeastern tip of Australia. We know that there's Tasmanian devils that's still in the Tasmanian tiger that went extinct.
Yeah, well, Tasmanian tiger is quite possibly extinct. The devil we have, and we have them on this land. We can hear them screaming sometimes at night. They're a small wild marsupial. And we have lots of wallabies and pademelons and echidnas. We have an incredible array of birds, from black cockatoos to kookaburras to fairy wrens and all kinds of things. Herons like to come to the little dam of the pond on our property here. It's a cloudy day today, so you can't see that there are actually some pretty good mountains across in World Heritage Wilderness immediately west of us. We're looking across the Huon River estuary, and just behind me, behind that curtain in the back there, is the Southern Ocean. Next stop, Antarctica. So this is an island. It's a heart-shaped island. In fact, I'll read you a poem about it, okay?
Yeah, sure.
This is from my new manuscript. It's called The Air in Tasmania.
Do you happen to know what page it's on, so I can...
Well, it's from the Xerox handout I gave you. It's the second one in the group.
Okay, I've got it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. This green heart, afloat in Earth's more watery half, bears, like everywhere else, its lacerations. But the land takes flying lessons from the air, and the air's great cleanser, the sea. That cry in the near dark has yet to be identified. Open the window and listen. It comes to us like the earliest memory when we lay with no name at creation. But the world is not dew-wet and new. The continents are islands too, dividing like cells in a microscope. Between here and Patagonia, titanic volumes of air, the whorls and currents cover the distances known to the whales and migrating birds. We share it with bush, the lizards, the fish, the green rosellas coasting up to a limb, from person to bird and back to a person writing late at night when the light of extinguished stars, having crossed an even vaster sea, can still be seen winking in the same abundance we are given to breathe.
Thanks so much. And that is The Air in Tasmania from your forthcoming manuscript, Pacific Light. And that's a beautiful poem. And one of the things that I find interesting about you is that you're one of the poets who talk about beauty still, I think. Yeah. And the importance of, what is the importance of beauty to you in the pursuit of poetry?
It's everything. It's everything, really. I mean, I also write about violence and death and historical tragedy and all this stuff, but none of that really has meaning without beauty. And beauty has its meaning because of all that other stuff, the violence and all that, and death. There's a lot of death in my life. I've known a lot of death, a lot of tragedy, a lot of suffering, madness, addiction in my family, all sorts of stuff like that. Everybody's got their problems, right? But I don't want to just belabor that stuff. I want to see if I can understand that it's a bloody privilege to be alive on this planet, to be able to walk, to see, to feel things, to touch things, to be able to love is an unbelievable gift and privilege. And I want to try to convey some of that. I wrote an opera libretto that's, the recording is out now from Naxos. It's called The Parting. And it's about the most awful thing in the world, right? The Holocaust. It's about the death of the Hungarian poet Miklos Radnóti. And there's a dialogue between Radnóti and death in that libretto, in which Radnóti's saying, why do I live? Why am I alive? And death's answer is to learn about love, to love, to make beautiful things, to die. And that's it for me. That is it. I feel like I'm facing my death every day. I'm living with my death. I'm residing with my death. And that makes the acuteness of the beauty of this world, the beauty of my wife and her poetry, the beauty of the great poems by other people that I read, the great literature I read, the great music I listen to, all the more important. And the great gift that I have, this body that can still move and dance to it, react to it, live with it, reside with it. Man, that's what it's about. Appreciating that to some extent.
What is the connection to death? Like, have you always had that perspective? One of the interesting things with Rattle is that, people always write it and say, half the poems in your issues are about death. And to me, like, I've always felt that, like, that death is like the period on the sentence, that nothing could exist and have meaning without an end, and so and that's something that we haven't really reconciled with, is like human beings and a culture. We're not good at it like the Greeks were, to bring up the Greeks.
No, the Greeks still are damn good at it. The modern Greeks bury their dead for 3 years and then dig up the bones and wash the bones.
Oh, wow. Do they? I didn't know that. Wow.
You can visit the bones of your grandmother in a small Greek village. Their understanding of death is powerful. And I think Americans need to learn a lot from the rest of the world. Americans can be so blinkered about this stuff. We live in a country, or I used to live in a country, that's full of this notion that somehow or another my individual success is somehow or another so transcendent that it will transcend death. That's nonsense, utter nonsense. Now, then there's Yeats saying, many times man lives and dies between his two eternities. I have died many times. I have lived through experiences that I thought would kill me, that I thought I could not possibly survive. And here I am. I've come through the fire. I've lived. I've survived this far, and I will die in it. Maybe it will be painful, and maybe it won't be painful. But is that a period on the end of life? I'm not conventionally religious, but I know that I will be the grass. I will be the air. I will be the trees. I will be somehow or another a part of this earth, of this life again. Keats talks about dying into life. Now, he's only at 25, he's like 21 when he writes that in one of his longer poems. He understands that there's some kind of anguish we have to go through in order to live fully. We have to dance the tragedy as well as the comedy. The two masks of Greek theater really do have their meaning in relation to each other, don't they? In any case, I think the denial of death is just ridiculous. I had a brother who died at 28, and my biggest regret for him is that he didn't get more years in which to understand things. I just read the great big new biography of Sylvia Plath. She died at 30. Imagine what she could have done if she'd lived as long as Louise Glick, Plath wrote these great flower poems before Louise Glick's great flower poems, Maybe Plath would win the Nobel Prize. I could wish that Seamus Heaney lived longer. He was 74, But the thing is, in the time that we are given, whatever time it is, 10 years or 80 years, to make the most we can out of what we are given, out of the gifts we are given. That is what life is for. And then, the rest is out of our hands.
Is that what draws you to poetry in general? Like, and early on too, that, poetry is sort of the act of noticing life is another way to think of poetry and to appreciate. And is that the thing, like when you were young, fishing, and then hitchhiking across, the Canadian West. Is that what drew you to poetry even then? Was the
Absolutely, absolutely. When I was in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, these bare-backed, treeless islands, I was on a ship anchored off the island, and then we sailed to Kodiak and worked there. I used to wander off alone into the hills, and I would sing Shakespeare songs to myself when nobody else could hear me, right? When I was working as a gardener in upstate New York, I would be raking 5 acres of leaves and then hauling them behind a tractor out to a composting area. I would be singing W.H. Auden to tunes I made up in my head when nobody could hear my voice because the tractor noise would drown it out, right? That kind of music has been in my body all my life. Just yesterday, my wife showed me a little film of a 3-year-old boy who's the son of dear, dear friends of ours, whose father is reading to him from the Oxford Rhyming Dictionary. And that little boy is rocking back and forth on his knees and laughing giddily. He's laughing ecstatically at the sound of those rhymes. Now, here's the question. Why do some people lose that joy? What the hell happens? What happens to us and how can we get it back? I think that to a very great degree, poets are people who want to get that joy back, that fundamental appreciation of song and sound and meaning and dance and all of it, which makes us a bit nutty to some other people, right? We don't seem like the most stable people in the world. I feel perfectly stable myself, but some friends of mine have not always thought I was so stable. Some members of my family have not always thought I was so stable. So, what is it to be devoted to this thing?
And why do we forget it? Like there's that Cummings line I always think of, and down they forgot as up they grew. But why is it that we lose that? Why do you think?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is that our education beats it out of us. I think it's got to be more complex than that. I mean, hormones crash into us, and then the ego is ascendant for quite a few years. And it's pretty hard to find a human being who can transcend his or her ego pain between the ages of about 12 and the ages of about 40. There's a lot to fight against. And of course, there's practicality, right? You got to make a living. Remember the song by Guy Clark, "There ain't no money in poetry," and that's what sets the poet free. I've had all the freedom I can stand. It's cold dog soup and rainbow pie, something enough to get me by. Fill my belly to the day I die with cold dog soup and rainbow pie. Well, yeah. For the most part, there ain't no money in poetry, but that's what sets the poet free. And a lot of people out there preaching freedom in America have got no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think I always think of for some reason when I think about that, I think of Adam and Eve, suddenly realizing they're naked. I think that's what happens to people at around 12 or 13. It's like, oh, I can't express myself nakedly. I'm vulnerable. And then there goes poetry, I think, for the most part. Let's keep moving with some more poems. But I should say before we do, if anybody has any questions for David Mason, just leave them in the chat windows. I'm watching YouTube and Facebook, but not Twitter or Periscope. I can only have so many windows and videos up at a time. But if you want to ask a question for David, especially YouTube, find the YouTube chat window and leave it a question there, and I'll pass it along. But what should we read next, Dave?
Well, I'm gonna say a poem from the Sound called "Driving with Marley." It's on page 81, and this is based on an event in which a little 3-year-old granddaughter asked me a question. Since we're on the topic of 3-year-olds not losing the love of poetry, driving with Marley. "Grandpa, do you live in the sky?" "No, but I live on a mountain and came on a plane to see you." "Why?" "All leaping thought and ruminant pool. A 3-year-old is a verbal fountain, water clear enough to see through. Anything can fool the wizard in the front seat of the car. How far will we go, Grandpa? how far? Little one, I must relearn all subjects such as distances, study the foolishness, and burn like candlelight to worry less and less about the night. It's not that youth is always right, but that an aging man is too preoccupied with plans. I do live in the sky, but I do not know why.
Yeah, that was a wonderful poem from The Sound. That was Driving with Marley. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, David. And I don't know, it's the sort of the gravity and the truth in your work always stands out too. One thing I wonder about, my introduction to you, so my history, just as a reader, I randomly picked up Mark Jarman's Unholy Sonnets, which I never, I was just a science major at University of Rochester, where you went, actually.
Oh, for God's sake, amazing. I bet we know some of the same people. We have to talk about that.
Yeah, we probably do. Yeah, and even you mentioned gardening in Rochester. I was doing the same thing. I worked a summer job for 2 years doing landscaping, so I would be like reciting poems on my tractor too. Yeah, exactly. Drowning out.
I was the harbor master of the Rochester, New York Yacht Club.
Oh, wow.
For 2 of the summers when I was getting my PhD there. It was quite something. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But then after that, I read Rebel Angels, which was just a wonderful book that you did with Mark Jarman for New Formalist Poets back in like 96, I think it was. And then I kind of, to be honest, forgot about you until I read Ludlow, which is such an amazing book about the Ludlow massacre and such a political topic too, which is kind of different in a way than your other work. So do you want to just explain what Ludlow was? I mean, it was this. Well, why don't you explain it? You can explain it better than me.
Sure. Well, one thing is I've written narrative and dramatic poems all my life, so poems in the voices of other characters, etc. And I'm even writing a prose novel right now, so who knows what's coming of that. Ludlow is an event my parents told me about when I was a kid visiting relatives in Colorado. It's an event when there was a strike of immigrant coal miners in southern Colorado. The National Guard was called in. A long, protracted sort of war took place, culminating on April 20th, 1914, when a handful of men, women, and children were massacred by the National Guard. I wrote a verse novel about that, and very proud of the book. Hayden Carruth once wrote me and said, "You got to write more of these. You got to write more of these verse novels, And maybe I will someday. I've written shorter narratives as well. But this is another aspect of poetry that I think is important. And really everything I write, I'm even finishing a book of essays now, literary critical essays, in which I say that what I'm always doing is I'm storytelling. And even in lyric poetry, I think to some degree I'm storytelling. Remember that the mother of the muses is memory. Remember that one of the jobs of the poet is to help us remember who we are. Remember that Plato says that learning is remembering, so that somehow or another we are trying to, as you said, connect. We are trying to get in touch with that realness in ourselves and in our lives and in the world around us. So Ludlow is an act of remembering. It's an act of remembrance. There's a lot of my opera work. It's the same thing, historical stuff. So
there's two things I always wondered about Ludlow, and the first is like why write it as a verse novel? Because you can reach such a larger audience in prose.
True.
And so the choice. Although,
why didn't I think of that?
Although I was talking to, I remember being in an AWP and talking to Mark Cull at Red Hen Press about how well Ludlow was selling. I think it was their best book, in years in that span. Yeah. And it's interesting that a poem that has a long narrative, or a book that has a long narrative, was their best-selling book. That was always interesting to me. But I always wondered though, why, what do you think that it gains being said in prose, like sung like that? versus in
I
poetry
think a lot
versus
about
prose.
Yeah, and there's an afterword to the book that raises the same question you're raising and tries to deal with it. I recommend the afterword to anybody who's interested. Basically, there's a lot of stuff that can be said. One thing that can be said is that there are lots of ways to tell stories, and that in fact, verse is a lot more like cinema. If you think of cinema as a string of images, montage of images, verse works that way. So ballads tell stories where in moving from one stanza to another, I don't have to explain or give a lot of information that a prose writer might be tempted to give. All I have to do is move to the next verse or move to the next line. Another thing I can do is I can sort of channel the verbal and narrative energies of a story by using meter. In Ludlow, it's mostly blank verse, a little bit of rhyme, a little bit of a foray into hexameter, a little dose of prose at one point. So when the book begins, it begins with shot firers filed in after the diggers left and found the marked drills for their measured shot. As daylight died, the men were blasting deep for the next day's cuts of coal, while down below the mesa, smells of cooking rose from shacks in rows. And there Louisa scrubbed the pot as if she were some miner's wife and not a sapper's daughter, scrawny, barely 12. Now I'm just moving into the opening. I'm finding my meter. I'm finding the measure of the line I'm going to use. It finally only becomes a regular iambic line in about line 3. As daylight died, the men were blasting deep, right? Before that, I'm just charging the language. I'm packing it in. I'm not explaining all my terminology to you like shot firers and sappers. I'm suggesting that my audience can just feel this texture of a life, of a world, of a universe in which the action happens. And I'm introducing you to this little girl who becomes the heart of the book because she feels torn between the immigrants among whom she grows up and the more settled business class folks with whom she comes to live as the book goes on. That tension in her life and the tension in the life of a historical character, a Greek immigrant, are the foundations, the narrative foundations of the book for me. So yeah, why tell it in verse? Well, a friend of mine, Scott Martell, who used to write, and I think does again write for the Los Angeles Times, wrote a prose book. And his prose book came out soon after my verse book. And Scott and I have often shared the stage together to talk about Ludlow. It's very interesting that both of our books have fared pretty much equally well out there in the world of book sales and storytelling. There's an issue in America, which is that the destructiveness of commentary, of political commentary, tends to make some people reject the book as if it were pure lefty politics, pure pro-immigrant, pro-miner, pro-union and all that, which is a big oversimplification of the book. I think the book has a texture of reality that doesn't make angels out of anybody. I don't believe that human beings are angels. I wouldn't be interested in them if they were. So I don't think it's a politically simplistic book. It is, however, an angry book. It's very angry about power and about people who misuse power. And I feel a lot of that anger. That anger comes out even in some poems in my new book, Pacific Light.
Yeah, well, it's such an amazing book. It's one of my favorite, and I recommend everybody at home pick it up. I love that what you said about, I never, working in poetry full time for like 15 or 17 years, I've never thought of it as a film strip, a strip of movie film with each line being like a frame. But that is a really cool way to think about it. And
it was actually a filmmaker gave me that image. A guy named Larry Bridges, who lives in Pacific Palisades and is a film editor. He's the guy who many years ago, when I was working briefly in the film business, he's the guy who gave me that idea. It's never left me. It's a good image.
Yeah, it really is. It's really awesome the way it rolls up the page. It's so cool. And you kind of touched a little bit about what I also wanted to ask about, which is that to me the poem ends up being the book, the novel in verse ends up being very political without falling into the political trap. Like we do Poets Respond, where we have poems about current events every week, and there's sort of this trap where you're sort of projecting your political opinions rather than sort of exploring them. And
Yeah.
can you just say a little bit about like how you do political poetry?
Yeah.
It's such a difficult thing to do. I remember talking to Troy Jollymore, and he was saying that political poetry is impossible because if you have political opinion, then you have a opinion, and you can't write a poem with a pre-subscribed opinion. And so how do you get over those hurdles and sort of be political as a poet?
Yeah, it is difficult. This is the subject of my new book of essays, which I think will be out next year from Paul Dry Books. I'm just actually putting the finishing touches on it right now. The book is called Incarnation and Metamorphosis: Can Poetry Change Us? And essay after essay is about this difficult position. I do believe poetry can change us, but I believe there's a difference between political change and the kind of change that we go through in life and in art. There are great political poems. Yeats's Easter 1916, Auden's September 1st, 1939, Auden's The Shield of Achilles, really, is a very great political poem that never simplistically states what the author's point of view is. Instead, it makes you feel the absolute grief of historical madness, warfare, and the Holocaust, and what modern warfare does to people. All anti-war poetry is political poetry, and all war poetry is anti-war poetry. Homer is a political poet, but Homer also pulls us into the other emotions we feel in warfare, glory, ecstasy, madness, all sorts of things. And rage, right? All these different things. Grief. You know, when Priam and Achilles are facing each other, weeping for their dead, there's nothing more moving in all of literature. Well, that's political in the very best sense. You know, I have been asked myself to write for political occasions. I'll give you a little tiny poem. I was asked to write for the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, and when I was Poet Laureate of Colorado. And I wrote a little poem. It's not in the groups you have. It's in the sound. Maybe I'll find the page here and be able to tell you what page it is. But here's how it goes. It's called Saying Grace. It's on page 31.
Okay. So
my job is to write about the Wilderness Act. The first thing I do is I question the idea of what wilderness is. Okay? If every moment is and is a wilderness to navigate by feel, whether half or whole, the river takes a turn. The forest has to burn. The broken fern to grow. The silence of a night of supplicating stars may answer us aright. Our worries and our cares are not the same as theirs. Give us this day more world than we can ever know.
Excellent.
Now take the phenomenon of the wildfires in the West, which I have some experience of, and it's our deepest fear in Tasmania and the deepest fear on the mainland of Australia, obviously. Trump will come over and say, well, this is because you didn't rake up the woods. Somebody else will come and say, hey, this is federal land. You're the guy who's supposed to be managing this stuff better. Somebody else will say, yeah, but too many people are living in the woods and not taking care of their land. I'm going to a workshop with an Aboriginal teacher this coming weekend where I'm going to learn about fire prevention on my land from the Aboriginal point of view. The Aboriginal people kept this land as a kind of parkland and prevented it from being a dense jungle that would burn too easily. In any case, my poem doesn't do that. My poem just says, look, fire is natural. Fire is life. It's real. It's going to happen. The broken fern can grow again. right? I also say in a sort of prayer at the end of the poem, give us this day more world than we can ever know. Now, the simplistic, self-righteous, egotistical political poem will say, I know the world, I know the truth, I know what's right, I know what justice is, and you don't. I don't do that, and I will never do that. I will never do that. I do that when I go into the voting booth, but that's not interesting as art. What's interesting as art is to be pulled into the problem that we experience, the tragedy, the pain, the grief of it, and to feel it more intensely as the problem it is. Guess what? Our prayers have been answered. We do have more world than we can ever know. This is a great gift. This is a great, great, great gift. Good political poetry will also teach us humility in the face of the political problem. The sense that we need grace, we need help, and we need to be kindness, and we need to be kind to others. And we need to try to meet each other in whatever terms we can find to meet each other. We don't have much time, in this life. Poetry's always telling us this, and the best political poetry is telling us the same thing.
Yeah, I always think of, it's not poetry, but The Jungle by, Upton Sinclair is the sort of example of how it's not poetry, but embodying lived experience and then having more empathy is how poetry really functions politically, I think, rather than the whole, rhetorical, propaganda, which poetry can become very often if you're not not very conscious of that. I'm doing this thing, which I do with poets that I really like and have read a lot, where I'm not giving you enough reading time. I want more poems. Everybody needs more poems. So what do you want to read next? And then we'll get to some audience questions too.
I'll do one more from The Sound, and I can turn to the new book too. I'll do one called Fathers and Sons. It's on page 78.
Okay, thanks.
Totally personal, totally real, totally true. It just flat out happened to me. When I wrote this poem, I felt scared by it. I thought people would hate it, and it turns out people don't hate it. Some things, they say, one should not write about. I tried to help my father comprehend the toilet, how one needs to undo one's belt, to slide one's trousers down and sit. But he stubbornly stood and would not bend his knees. I tried again to bend him toward the seat, and then I laughed at the absurdity. Fathers and sons, how he had wiped my bottom half a century ago, and how I would repay the favor if he would only sit. Don't you? He gripped me, trembling, searching for my eyes. Don't you? But the word was lost to him. Somewhere a man of dignity would not be laughed at. He could not see it was only the crazy dance that made me laugh, trying to make him sit when he wanted to stand.
Just a wonderful poem. That was Fathers and Sons. And I haven't found a way to put your face on the screen as you read without it being too big. The dimensions are wrong. But you memorize your poems, which I noticed, and not many people do.
Yeah, I don't have all of them memorized. Like some of this new stuff I don't have down yet. But I prefer to have it that way. And it just feels like I can then improvise, change the way I perform it each time. Don't have to do the same way all the time. What I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to speak like a human being, Mm-hmm. I'm trying not to do poetry voice. And I don't always make it work, but the best performer I ever saw was a friend of mine who died at the age of 50, the great poet Michael Dennehy. He always worked from memory, and he would just leap up on a stage, and the poem would happen as if he was making it up in that instant. And if I could perform like Michael, that would be the way to do it. But I try my best.
Yeah, I found that I kind of memorize poems by accident while I'm writing them, and then you sort of just know them. And then there's that weird thing where you almost know it, but then you're worried the whole time that you might forget a line or misplace. And sometimes there's a refrain. I'll like skip 8 whole stanzas because anyway, so let's move on to some audience questions. So Josh Williams on Facebook asks if it's an interesting question. Do you think all poems in some way are formal poems, that there must be a structure in whatever way in which a poem operates? What makes a poem work for you? Where do you think poetry is headed? So there's a lot of questions there. So dig in.
A lot of questions. In an odd way, they're deeply related because poetry's only headed somewhere good if poets learn their trade. So, of course, I believe in the traditional poetic forms, and I love them and I use them. Sometimes I'll use them in nonce ways, which means I adapt them to my own purposes. But I believe every good poem, free verse, prose, whatever, is a formal artifact. And form can take many forms. I'm reading the marvelous new book of essays by Kay Ryan, Synthesizing Gravity. I recommend it to everybody. And that reminds me that Kay Ryan's poetry, which I think is as distinctive as the poetry of anybody writing in English right now, is mostly a kind of rhymed free verse. And it feels like intensely formal stuff because it's in a way the turning of her own mind as it responds to the world. So in that sense, it's every bit as formal as Emily Dickinson, to whom she's often compared. She probably hates that comparison by now, but the comparison is there because they both wrote short poems and they're both women, but I don't know what else you can say. But that's formality. There's formality in a really good prose poem. I find good prose poems are a little bit rare for me, but they exist, and when poetry bores me, and I will be honest with all of you and just say, most poetry I read bores me to tears, it's because the poet is simply reporting the facts of the case as they occurred and not trying to do something with language in the course of doing it. So, I read poems for magazines, I'm an editor, etc., and I will often say that this would not interest me if it was prose. Prose writers have to be more interesting than this. What are you doing? Why are you saying, today I got up and drank my first cup of coffee? Why is that interesting? Why is that an opening for a poem? It's not an opening for a poem. A great opening might be like a line from a poem by my wife. He fired through the dog's head, had to. That's an opening line from a poem. That could be the opening line of a novel, right? That could be the opening line of anything, but it's a great opening line. He fired through the dog's head, had to. The language is compressed, it's pulsing, and it's also pulling you right into a situation. Every poem is a situation. It's a room of language. And you got to make me want to go in there. You got to make me want to open that door and read further. So you have a job to do as a poet, right? So in terms of where poetry is going, I think maybe it's always been true that there's just too much poetry out there that's not doing the job, that's not doing the work that poets need to do. Whether it's what we call free verse, I don't believe free verse exists. I think Eliot is right when he says there's no such thing as free verse. There's only good verse, bad verse, and chaos. You've got to make that thing a matter of verbal interest and intensity and attitude and vitality. The kind of lucidity that would pull me into opacity and make me care about it. So there's a lot to be done by any good poem. And mainly what I'm trying to cut from my own stuff is information, the prosaic, explanation. As the great Australian poet Les Murray said, nothing's free when it's explained. Think about that. Nothing's free when it's explained. Even writing literary criticism, you don't want to explain too much. You don't want to say too much. You want to leave a little room in there. You want to trust the reader to find his or her own way through it. So that's a lot, that's a mouthful, but all of those questions are related. They are related.
Yeah, that's great. Would this even be interesting in prose? I think, for reading submissions from a literary magazine, that is a question that I didn't realize, but I do ask myself all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a similar kind of vein. Michelle Pfeiffer, or Pfeiffer, over on Facebook asks, what advice do you have on perfecting the skills of imagery? Showing in a poem rather than coming right out and saying it. So that's kind of related, but yeah.
Yeah. Read the best makers of images. You, Tim, read a marvelous poem by Ted Kooser when you started this program. Ted's an old friend of mine, and man, oh man, he is a poet of the image, of the metaphor, and he's a painter as well, and that really comes across in his poems. Read Ted Kooser till the books fall apart. Read Philip Larkin. You'll notice that Larkin writes about utterly ordinary life in a way that makes it seem as if it's infused with Godhead. There's just something extraordinary about the way he makes the most ordinary image come across. Really, really look. And notice the way you're using phrases. Phrases are where you get into trouble. George Orwell says this, that when you're writing in phrases instead of in words, you're going to fall into cliche. So when you look at a modifier noun phrase or a modifier verb phrase, chances are you're going to be writing a cliche. So take a look at that phrase, circle it. How can I change the modifier? How can I change the noun? Or can I get rid of one or the other of them, right? Or can I get rid of the whole thing? So you got to look at the language, but also look at the world. I was sitting on a riverbank yesterday, watching these little crabs come up out of the mud, and I stood up to look at them, and they all just vanished into the mud. And then I sat down again. And after a little while, they came out of their holes again. And what were they doing? They were pecking at the mud with the picks of their legs. Okay, now that's an image that just came to my head, that their legs were like picks picking at the river mud, right? And I'm just trying to say what I saw there. I stood up again, and the crabs vanished into their holes. That's incredible. It means they noticed me. I think I'm the one who's important seeing them. It turns out they're seeing me, right? Or sensing me, or whatever the hell it is. That means that seeing is being seen. What's looking back at you? How are we being seen as well as how we're seeing? What would happen if you could write from the point of view of the image you're trying to write about? Lots of ways of turning that around.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Let's hear another poem, and then we'll move on to some questions from YouTube. But what do you want to read next?
I think I'll read the very little poem that's in your current issue, Note to Self. I was finishing my teaching career in Colorado last, what would have been winter in Colorado, summer here in Tasmania. And I had a pad in a notepad here in my little apartment that literally said Note to Self on the top of it. And I wrote this poem on that notepad. To be old and not to feel it is a gift. To be supplanted and not to care. So be it. The birds are not supplanted by the air. The air, what's left of it, by flood or fire. The effort of a life, the wasted hour, the kind word given to a stranger's child, are understood as kin and disappear. Time to be grass again, ongoing, wild.
Yeah, time to be grass again. That was Note to Self from the current issue of Rattle, number 69. Thanks for reading that, David. Let me see. Let's go over to YouTube and look at some of the questions. So, Wendy Vitalik, I don't know what this means, actually.
Wendy!
Yeah, we should have Wendy, another Colorado poet, but we really should
Absolutely.
have Wendy as a guest soon.
Yeah.
Wendy, we got to get you on. So she asks if you could give us a little of the collector's tale.
Ho, 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 Wendy. Oh, God, Wendy, you're asking a lot. This is a very dark narrative poem that you can find in the Sound. It's on page 131. I'm just going to read a small bit of the opening. It's in two voices, and one of them is a man I've always imagined was gay, a shopkeeper in the Twin Cities, whose life is broken into, disturbed by a man who's based on a guy I knew. In this case, the guy I knew is drunk. He's also a Native American, which you might consider has the danger of being a cliche, but I think he's very much actualized and very angry, and he is going to tell a story. So it's a story within a story that will change their lives. So I'm not even going to get into the second voice. The poem's too long for that. I'll just read a little bit of the opening. When it was over, I sat down last night, shaken and quite afraid I'd lost my mind. The objects I have loved surrounded me like friends in such composed society. They almost rid the atmosphere of fright. I collected them, perhaps, as one inclined to suffer other people stoically. That's why when I found Foley at my door, not my shop, but here at my private home, the smell of bourbon for his calling card, I sighed and let him in without a word. I'd only met the man 2 months before and found his taste as tacky as they come, his Indian ethic perfectly absurd. The auction house in St. Paul where we met was full that day of cherry furniture. I still can't tell you why he'd chosen me to lecture all about his Cherokee obsessions, but I listened. That I regret. My patience with a stranger's geniture compelled him to disturb my family tree. He told me of his youth in Oklahoma, his white father who steered clear of the res, a grandma native healer who knew herbs for every illness. Nothing like the burbs, I guess. He learned to tell a real tomahawk from a handsaw, or lift his half-mad gaze and entertain you with some acid barbs. So he collected Indian artifacts, the sort that sell for thousands in New York. Beadwork, war shirts, arrowheads, shards of clay beloved by dealers down in Santa Fe. He lived to corner strangers, read them tracts of his invention on the careful work he would preserve and pridefully display. Foley roamed the Great Plains in his van, his thin hair tied back in a ponytail, and people learned that he was smart enough to deal. He made a living off this stuff, became a more authenticated man. But when he drank, he would begin to rail against the white world's trivializing fluff. Now, I think I'll just stop there. I flubbed some lines, etc. But what happens in the story, this is a story a man told me about the most horrifying thing he had seen in a lifetime of collecting. It's a terrible artifact. It's an artifact that goes to the heart of the darkness that is America, the darkness of racism that is there at the birth of the nation and that is festering like an open wound in America now. It's a darkness in Australia too, but I think America has a even more difficult case of it. and is less mature as a country in the way it tries to deal with it. Australia is doing a better job of, despite all the problems and all the lapses, of trying to recognize and acknowledge what this is. I'm living in a place where they used to say that all Aboriginal people had been wiped out. They no longer say that. It's a much more difficult, complex history than they suppose. And the presence, the Aboriginal presence here in the bush is very powerful and very strong. I felt the same in America all my life. I felt ashamed that in Colorado, the reservation was pushed off to the southern tier of the state. Most people in Colorado don't know the name for Pikes Peak, Tava, the Ute Indian name for it. Most people in Colorado don't know that the land around Colorado Springs was sacred to the Ute, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho. Most people in Colorado don't know about the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. It's another part of my job as a poet, is to speak the stories of the tribe, to tell people, to help people remember. And that's what The Collector's Tale is about. It's fiction, but it's fiction that cuts into the most painful racial memories in America.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because as I was reading, I think I was reading The Sound maybe today. I was thinking about how, I live in this mountain town, and I don't know the original name for it. Like, we live near Mount Baldy, and I don't know what the original name for it was. I don't know what our valley was called. We hike all these different hikes and different canyons, and I know what they're called now, but I don't know what they're called then, even as we can see, boreholes for crushing grain in the rocks as we walk by, like people inhabited this place, and we don't know what the names are for things, which comes up in your poems sometimes.
And what Americans need to remember is that those people are still there. They haven't vanished. They're there. Many on reservations, feeling disappeared and unheard and unseen, but they're there and they can tell you the stories. And it is incumbent on Americans to start listening, start finding out where they live. I recommend it. I recommend going out, trying to talk to people and finding the stories.
Over on YouTube, Liz Winfield asks, sort of slightly related, what poetry are you reading now, and how has that been affected by Australian poets since moving here? I mean, you're married to an Australian poet, Kelly Conan Davies, who I got to see yesterday. I think she's probably in the background somewhere. I
think she's in her bedroom watching this on her laptop.
We've I've been meaning to do an Australian poets issue, or maybe what's the word, Oceania or something like that, so we can include New Zealand and other island places. But
that would be great.
Yeah, but what is your experience of Australian poets? Like, what's the
fantastic?
Yeah.
One of the books propping up my laptop right now is an anthology of Australian poetry since 1788.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna.
Wow, that's thick.
Some friends of mine, some new friends of mine, just gave me this book when I became a legal permanent resident of Australia in August, and we threw a big party here at the house, and that was one of the gifts I got. I love it. Australian poetry is unbelievably rich, including Aboriginal poetry and Aboriginal writing that's happening right now. A lot of Aboriginal writing happening right now, Aboriginal drama happening right now, Aboriginal film and television and all sorts of stuff going on. One of the greatest poets in the English-speaking world, a man who should have won the Nobel Prize, Les Murray, died just last year. And the fact that he didn't get the Nobel Prize means that the Nobel Prize is pretty much meaningless. He's a great, great, great writer who can make the language do things that almost nobody else in the contemporary scene can do. There's an Australian poet living in America who's a dear friend of mine, Kevin Hart, beautiful poet, who's teaching religion at the University of Virginia, is a great scholar, a friend of Jacques Derrida, etc. I'll give you a little poem by my wife, who is a genius and one of the greatest poets writing right now in the world. This is a little poem she wrote in Oregon. I recite it a lot. It's called August Moon. She's thinking of a blue moon. She's looking up at the moon. And she goes, "Gray-faced as worlds flow fast away, for worlds are done with every day, for minds hot-wired to the sun. Her news is blue. Her borrowed light softens the truth. The truth is night." Now, in the history of poetry on the face of the earth, no one else has ever said that. That is a remarkable little artifact. That's worthy of William Blake. And if you go to the new issue of Literary Matters, when it comes up online, you'll find 2 new, incredibly Blakean poems by my wife on that website. She's a great, great, great writer. She makes the language come alive like nobody else. If I had her gifts, I could get the Nobel Prize, but I don't have her verbal gifts. I have to struggle along in my own stumblebum Yankee way.
Well, make sure she sends some poems to us over here at Rattle, and we'll have to have her on
I'll
too.
do it. She is suspicious of the publishing world, but I'll entice her.
We're a good place to publish, so tell her that. I tried to pull it up, but it's behind a paywall. So I got it, and I got excited, and then I couldn't. The August Moon poem. But
if anybody wants it, you can email me at djm1254@gmail.com, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Let's. We're pretty much over time, but would you like to finish off with one last poem?
Yeah. What should I do?
Yeah, anything you want.
I'll tell you what. I'll do a little formal poem. No, I know what I'll do. I'll do a love poem to my wife.
Oh, that's perfect.
This one is in the Sound. It's called The Soul Fox, and it's on page 106, and it's very short. This happened in Colorado. We had a little cabin in my last years of teaching there. It was October 2011. The great psychologist James Hillman had just died, and Chrissy just found out. Her publishing name is Calais Conan Davies. Her real name is Chrissy. She just found out about Hillman, and she was totally grief-stricken. She was also feeling very much at a loss being in America, feeling like America was a country that had gone off the rails, which it is, and wondering why she was there. And we saw this fox run through the snow out the back window. And while she was in the back room having a bit of a cry over all these things, I was in the front room writing this poem for her, The Soul Fox. My love, the fox is in the yard. The snow will bear his print a while, then melt and go. But we who saw his way of finding out, his night of seeking, know what we have seen and are the better for it. Write. Let the white page bear the mark, then melt with joy upon the dark.
Excellent. That was The Soul Fox by David Mason from The Sound. Thanks so much for being a guest today, David.
Tim, you are a wonderful, wonderful guy, and what you do is a great gift. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks.
And I hope, let this be the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship.
Yeah, okay? Yeah, definitely. I hope so. Thanks so much for being a guest, David. It's just wonderful to see you after reading your books for so many years.
Thank you. Okay. My best to everybody. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it was David Mason reading from mostly from his newest book, The Sound, which could put the cover up really quick. I didn't get a physical copy in time, but there's the cover of The Sound. His new and selected. Then he has Pacific Light, which is coming out soon, but not yet. And But the sound is from Red Hen Press, so go to redhenpress.org to find that. And now let's move on to the open mic portion of the show. As always, I should say we had to get rid of David. Sorry, David. If you wrote a poem for the prompt this week, email it right now to openmic@rattle.com. All one word. That's openmic, openmic @rattle.com. And then you can call in over phone, 818-850-7727. That's 818-850-7727. Let it ring a couple times, and I will call you back. It'll appear on my call list, so that's how that kind of works. And or you can send a chat message over Skype to Rattle Poetry, all one word, Rattle Poetry. And then I'll see that, and I'll call you when the time is right. That's how we get the timing right. Someone's calling right now. Brenda's calling right now, Brendan Komarinsky. We have a bunch of people lined up. Let's see whose poems we have. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of poems, too, so let's try to get to them. We'll get to as many as we can. The prompt for this week was... Oops, that's next week. We don't want next week's yet. We want this week's. This week's prompt is... Write a poem exploring the motivations of a mythological creature, vampire, unicorn, dragon, etc. So it's sort of a Halloweenish prompt. Write about a mythological creature, something, probably creepy. I decided to, since it's Halloween, write about jack-o'-lantern, which I never knew the story of, where that comes from. And the story is that Lazy Jack was a blacksmith who tricked the devil into there's a bunch of different versions, but in different versions he tricks the devil, and then in order to get the devil out of his trap, he says, you have to not take my soul to hell. And so the devil says fine, and he lets him out of his trap, and he gets to walk eternity now, living a hellish kind of life without having to go to hell, and because he tricked the devil. And that was the story of Lazy Jack and why we have jack-o'-lanterns. Oh, and so once Jack died, he was like, well, I'm walking around, but how am I going to see where I'm going? And the devil threw him a piece of coal to walk the earth with, and that's where the jack-o'-lantern comes from. He threw it in a gourd and became jack-o'-lantern. And so my poem, my little poem, a little syllabic poem with some rhymes. I stole this form from David Mason in his book, and then didn't go. He goes through 2 pages in this poem. In this form, but it's syllabic with 757 lines and then rhymes. You'll see. Here it is. This is Lazy Jack. I wander through all me nights like I did me days, holding up the faintest lights, like me mother always says. Lonely bit of coal is me, endless is me maze, but I paid my toll, now I stroll ablaze. That's my tiny little poem, Lazy Jack, for the prompt this week. And now let's go to Megan's poem. Megan wrote, and I haven't read it yet. Let's see what it is. This is An Ogre at the Vampire's Ball. I long to be sleek and pale as moonlight, red blooming at my throat like flowers. The way they shuffle and spin, it's a sight for deep-set eyes. And while I cower, they hope to be spied, aware of their beauty and strange grace, swan-throated thieves on a velvet lake. At least my evil is plain to see. There's nothing up my ripped and rotting sleeves. What they sink their teeth into does not resist. What I long to hold runs at first glance. The endings are the same, death with a twist. But only one gets to have the first dance. That was Megan's poem, An Ogre at the Vampire Ball. Wonderful. We get a whole bunch of Halloween stuff going on here. Let's see what you have. Who should we call up first? Well, the first in line is Angela Gartner. Let's call up Angela and see how she's doing tonight. Got her on mute. We'll pull up her poem really quick. Hey, Angela, how you doing tonight?
She's always so good.
She is. She's very talented, or talented as she would make. My Rochester accent comes out. We didn't talk about that with David, but I say the word talented apparently very funny. But she is very talented. So So your poem that was Dullahan, and I'm trying to remember, that's a horse, right? Isn't that the steed of somebody, or am I wrong?
Well, it's the Headless Horseman
Oh, the Headless
because
Horseman. Okay.
yeah, because like Irving, wrote the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but he actually got it from the Irish folklore of the Dullahan, and basically, so this is actually his version was not as kind of scary as the Irish version. So I kind of it's kind of cool. I mean, I was learning this because I thought, oh, mythical creatures, and I'm like, oh yeah, like the Headless Horseman's kind of a mythical creature, a mythical thing, and it really is, definitely through the Irish. It's something that I think it was like 1847 around is when, and like it's just been, a lot of, from what I've been reading, like, a lot of people got decapitated. That was kind of like a thing.
Well, I'm glad
So
that's
there's
not a thing
form of
anymore.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare
But
if somebody gets decapitated these days. So we're better off than we were then.
oh yeah, but I mean that was like the big, to kill, to punish someone, it was to decapitate someone. So, kind of the Headless Horseman kind of came through that, because there's, but he's a little bit crazier. He's definitely more about like death, but he doesn't take everybody. That's the thing. Like in the poem, you'll see it's like it's very interesting. So I was very
Yeah, that's the thing that I was watching. I looked up a whole bunch of different mythological creatures for this prompt, and I was noticing that back in the olden days, like they would think people that was like, will you be led to a nice place or led to your death? And there was sort of more of a like a, well, how will this person, this evil spirit judge you? Whereas now, if you watch a horror movie, it's just death, death, death. So I don't know what that means, but it might mean something.
right. I mean, yeah, there's different ways to torture somebody,
Yeah.
and he definitely, according to the legends, but for sure.
Okay, well, let's see this. This is the Dullahan. I might take a second. Yeah, it's going to take a second for me to get up the. There we go. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
The Dullahan. The rotting head rests in his hand. A human spine whip fits against his back. His coat clings against his leg. The wind calls to him as he gallops speedily into town. On the Gallican, worm-eaten horse, he seeks the memories of being whole. The living lifts up his damaged soul. He blinds them to look in their empty holes. If he knows your name, the departure is imminent. You have no gold to barter. You've abandoned your mortality and euphoria. Exist with him in the darkness and horror.
Excellent. That was the Dullahan. Yeah. Yeah. What?
And that again, Curran, it means without head in Irish, because there was also a headless horse as well as a headless person.
Oh, that'd be really creepy. A headless horse. Yeah. 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 This is definitely a good prompt for Halloween, and especially I'm looking out at the woods where I live, and you can see a headless horse anytime. It's creeping me out a little bit. Okay.
Okay. Well, you have a good night.
Yeah. You too. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks.
Bye. Okay. That ends a gardener with the Dullahan. We have a poem called Dullahan 2 in Rattle. It might be in the sonnet issue. It might be a sonnet, if I remember right. Let's, who's next in line? Let's call up, let's do Richard Westheimer. We haven't talked to him in a little bit. I'll find his poem. Here it is, prompt poem. Called back into being as a new wave takes shape. So the phone's ringing. He's not quite picking up yet. Well, we will do Richard. He might have his ringer off, which happens. Sometimes I'll call him back in just a little bit. Let's do Nivedita over in India so she can get on with her day after sharing her poem. Pull up her poem. This is The Reason I Live. Let's see if that works. Hopefully we're not having phone issues, which we did on the Poet Respond Live on Sunday. Let's see. Nivi's not answering either. Is my We'll try Richard again. We'll go back to Richard. Maybe he'll answer this time. I guess Mercury is still in retrograde, maybe? Hey, Richard, good to see you. Glad it worked out. I was getting a little nervous because I called you, then I called Nivi, and then and no answer in either place. So
it wasn't entirely my bad. I had my speaker on mute on my computer and watching you on my iPad.
Well, no problem. We got you now. So who did you write about for your mythological creature? Oh, he froze.
Which there's a little footnote at the bottom of my page, so you all don't have to do the research. It's from Jewish legend, a human figure made of clay or mud. Kind of think the Incredible Hulk, but brown.
When I was a kid, I was like 12 or so. There was an X-Files episode with a golem, and it freaked me out. It was like one of the, I don't know what it was, but after that episode, I had to, we had like a garbage, it was an apartment complex. I had to take the garbage out, and it was by the woods at the end of the big parking, and I would like run, and I'd throw it in and run back. I think I was a little too young to watch a golem. There was some kind of, I think somebody made a golem to, become an assassin or something, and it was like stalking people. I don't know what the deal is, but I remember being terrified by a golem. So
well, the mythical, the golems were originally meant to protect Jewish ghettos from pogroms, from the rabble as they came to dispossess the Jews of body and stuff. So
let's hear it. Called back into being as a new wave takes shape. Go ahead whenever you're ready. I'll put it up.
Okay, good. I was mud dug from the riverbank, formed into this human shape by 100 human hands, brought to life by amulet and incantation, set upright to peer outward through the mist to see what the shape of my maker's demise might look like. Behind me, inside these walls, no one sleeps. They fret over spectral threats, put their ears to the timbers, hear the chittering of rats, attracted even before the dying, before frenzy, ascent of death, out this pitched, dipped sticks, ablaze with rage that pours from the dark. I rise, roar with the fury of their lord, crush the blood from the marauders, watch as the others before me run, fade into the fog. I sit back, would weep if I had eyes, would hear the sighs behind me if I had ears. Children crawl from the holes they've hidden in. A man ties his gray beard to my hand, and I shudder. He pulls the phylactery from my mouth, and I sleep only to awaken again to the same pain behind me. Fear huddled before candlelight. Before me, fear lights the eyes of the torchbearers who shout, "You will not replace us. You will not." And I do weep, real tears, a servant to their fear, and now mine, which makes me human for now, until my masters are done with me, again and again and again.
Thanks for sharing that. That was Called Back into Being as a New Wave Takes Shape by Richard Westheimer. Thanks, Richard. That fascinating legend when you actually think about it and describe it. Thanks for sharing that poem.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, let's go back to Nivi. She texted me. Oh, she's in a meeting now. Work started early. I would appreciate if you could read my poem. Yeah, sure. I'll read Nivi's right now. Then we won't. Work started early and she's in a meeting. But this is The Reason I Live. Did she say what it's about? Let's see. Oh, unicorn. I chose to write the poem from the perspective of a unicorn, the unicorn that once roamed free and is now forced to live in secret and gather an army to fight the humans to free its friends. So this is Nivedita Karthik with The Reason I Live. And we'll just read it for her. The reason I live. I live in secret now, behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mighty from his high gorge. I once ran free through the forest green. I flew across the rainbow and touched the stars. I live in secret now, behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mightily from his high gorge. Under the crescent moon I now run wild, across fallow lands that merge with the sky. Lonely and alone, I yearn for my friends, but I live in secret now, behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mighty from this high gorge. My mane is embedded with 1,000 tales of fairies and pixies and fauns lost to the human hands. They now lie trapped in glass jars and left to die. So I live in secret now, behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mighty from this high gorge. Inside me snowballs a stormy squall, and glitter tears drip down my face. I am not beauty, grace, magic, and mystery, not gentle, pure, pleasant, and charming, because after all, I live in secret, behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mighty from this high gorge. I gather my coven and hide in secret behind the falling cascade of rumbling water that falls down mighty from this high gorge. When the time is ripe, you will soon see the power of a unicorn like me. And that was Nivedita Karthik. As always, wonderful poem. I love that the refrains in here. I live in secret. That seems like it could be a metaphor. Great poem. The reason I live. Thanks for sharing that, Nivedita. And let me move on to Caitlin Bucksbaum. We'll find Caitlin's poem. Hey, Caitlin, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I was trying to do too many things at once, and I had you on TV again, so I had to mute you.
No problem. I just realized, I kind of imagine you when you call in at like a NASA control. Like, I think it's the headphone with the thing, but I imagine you have like 6 computers going and like 8 screens, and you're like, making sure that the satellite lands on the asteroid, and then also reading a poem.
That's awesome. Maybe I'll have to write a poem about that.
So what did you write about? Calapuliute. I don't know how to say it.
I'm so happy that you attempted that.
Calapuliute. Maybe?
Almost, maybe, sort of. Calapuliute. And it is something I just discovered, kind of through random searching on the internet. That's the plural form of a creature in Inuit mythology that is basically like a female sea creature that steals children off the sea ice in the Arctic. And what people say is that story was developed, to keep kids off thin ice in the spring. Don't go out alone, or the Kalapilak will get you. So I never heard of it before, but I was looking for creatures. I wanted to do something non-standard and found this.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd never heard of that before. I love learning. That's my favorite thing about reading submissions, especially, is just learning new cool stuff. So I'm not going to try to say it again, though, but go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah, and I've been trying to practice pronouncing it myself, so I'll try not to screw it up. If we happen to have any Inuit listeners, I would love for them to correct me. All right. Calapiluit. It's said they eat the unaware, the foolish youth who venture out, alone beyond protective stairs, and onto sea ice elders doubt. Perhaps they're hungry, some men say, while others nod their solemn heads, but mothers know the price they pay when careless children end up dead. If a curious babe is lost to the depths of the Arctic Sea, it is a Kalapiluk's gain, her fulfilled wish for progeny. Her cold, unary existence, you see, is more than she can bear, and so she lures, with her sweet scent, young nomads to her kelpie hair. You may not catch a glimpse of one sulking in the Inuit spring, but if you dare to pause, to listen, hear their lament with sympathy.
Excellent. That was Calipulute by
Sort of.
whatever. By Caitlin Bucksbaum. We need that though here, even in Southern California. There's a lake like 4 miles down from me where people fall in and drown all the time because people in California don't know about ice, and we need some kind of legend to scare them from falling in the ice. There's a video if anybody wants to search, and it shows just one person after, like, people try to rescue the person who fall in, then they fall in. It's like a 10-minute video of just like, if it weren't like dangerous, it would be some kind of like Keystone Cops blooper kind of thing. It's almost funny, but it's like terrifying at the same time. It's like, so ice warnings are very important. Mythological creature. Thanks for that, for sharing that.
Yeah, you'll have to get your sci-fi fantasy mythology writer friends to get on that.
Yeah, we need that. It'll save lives for sure. Well, thanks for sharing that, Caitlin. That was great.
Yeah, have a good one.
Okay, let's see. Let's call up Sally Dunn. I'll try to find Sally's poem. Here it is.
Hello.
Hey, Sally. How you doing tonight?
Doing okay.
So what did you write about? Dragon Dreams. So I'm imagining it's a dragon.
Yes. It's actually a poem that I had sitting around not being completed and basically in disarray, and I ended up doing almost a complete rewrite of the thing.
Excellent. That's like a perfect way to use the prompt poem. So is there anything else you want to say about dragons, or do you just want to read it?
I'll just read it.
Okay, go ahead whenever you're ready then.
Okay. Dragon Dreams. It is not a thing of swans to understand the contemplations of desert dunes. It is not a thing of humans to consider the joys of electrons. It is not a thing of dragons to exist, but they do. Dragons understand the musings of desert dunes. They delight in the laughter of electrons. Yet this is not why dragons exist. They live because it is a thing of children to dream.
Excellent. That was Dragon Dreams by Sally Dunn. Thanks so much for sharing that, Sally.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Okay. We have to move kind of quickly. We're running out of time. Maybe we have room for maybe like 2 more people. Let's call up Brenda, who called right when the lines opened. I'll find Brenda's poem. I don't think we're going to be able to get to everybody today. I'm sorry, but we'll do 2 more. So the phone's ringing. This is Brenda Kamerinsky.
Oh.
Hey, Brenda. How you doing tonight?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. A really good night of poetry. What did you write about for the prompt?
I wrote about wraiths.
Wraiths?
Well, a wraith.
Interesting. So what is a wraith? I remember when I was a kid, I played not Dungeons and Dragons, Dragon Warrior, the first like role-playing game on the NES, and there were wraiths, and wraith knights were the worst, like the scariest enemy that you could come across. So what is a wraith? Although I've never really known. What's a wraith?
So according to my research, they are somebody who had a spell backfire on them and basically cursed themselves. They become trapped on the earth. They become very powerful, but they become full of hatred and just want to kill.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I had no idea. Okay. So
yes.
So I am Wraith. Go ahead whenever you're ready, unless there's anything else you want to say about it first.
No, let's go.
Okay, let's go.
I am Wraith. I was once living, like you, full of hopes and dreams, until my parents betrayed me, a child. I was sold to a rich lord and lady. I served their children, spoiled, selfish brats, infuriating. I escaped that hell and joined the witch in the woods, learned every spell she knew, and taught myself more. Then came that day, the hex cast severed my soul. I was cursed to an eternity of walking this plain, my countenance dark, but my power strong. I sought my revenge, took the Lord's children, added their souls to my realm. Then the Lord and Lady, with a touch I sucked the life from my betrayers. How they begged for mercy, such delight. I have wandered now for 1,000 years. Hatred is my existence. My presence chills the air. Dismay and despair, my calling card until the end of time. I desire to visit you.
Oh, very creepy. I Am Wraith by Brenda Komarinsky. Thanks so much for sharing that, Brenda.
Yep. All right. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, you too. Happy Halloween.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to Dragon Warrior, which it's a great game, by the way. Okay, we have time. Let's just do one more person. Actually, really quick, let's do Vicky Miko has a let's see, really quick. She has another haiga, and this is for the prompt. So let's I'll just read this really quick. I think Vicky can't be here live, but let's put this up really quick. So this is God, and she said she'd been traveling to the South when she wrote this. God made the world in his grip to fear him and praise him and worship. He conjured Adam and Eve just to get the folks to believe. Now God and the devil use us as their bargaining chip. Repent, and that's a billboard that says repent there that she took a photo of. Haiga by Vicky Miko. Thanks so much for sharing that, Vicky. Okay, let's move on really quick to one last person. We'll do Joy Stahl. And sorry if I didn't get to you today. I got to as many people as I could, but we'll call up Joy as the last guest, and then I have to get the kids to bed and whatnot. Let me throw this in a Word doc really quick, too.
Hello.
Hey, Joy, how you doing tonight?
All right. We had a bunch of snow, so my
Really? Where are you? I can't remember.
Southwestern Kansas.
Oh,
right
snow
on
in
the border
southwestern
with Colorado. So.
Well, it is that time of year, I guess. We're cold outside where we are for sure. It's like, I don't know. I had to drain the sprinkler lines yesterday because I didn't want them to freeze. And I got to patch the roof still, which is my least favorite time of the year. But anyway,
yeah.
A Grin Without a Cat. So what is this about?
Well, first, my journey to finding a topic. I started out with thinking about Grendel, because, of course, as an English teacher, that's my first thought. And then I thought, no, that's too done. So how about Morlocks? And I really couldn't get anything on that. And then, because I'm in the middle of teaching a horror unit in 8th grade, I wrote a title and nothing more. Mrs. Shelley ruined my street cred. So that's going to be a future poem. But then I got to the Cheshire Cat. So.
Oh, the Cheshire Cat. Okay, interesting. Yeah. That's not a mythological creature I thought of.
Not precisely a mythological creature, but it shares characteristics with them. So I think.
No, I think it totally counts. There's no doubt about that. So let's do A Grin Without a Cat. Go ahead whenever you're ready. It's on screen for everybody.
All right. A Grin Without a Cat. I didn't mean to confuse the poor girl. Honestly, she needed to know the truth if she wanted to survive her journey through this land. If you don't know where you want to get to, it honestly does not matter which way you go. When portals to alternate universes are in play, then things get more confusing. Not to mention disorienting. So many body parts to remember to bring along. So many words to remember in so many languages. Mad, quite mad. We're all mad here. We might be mad there too, but mad might mean something else entirely. And if you think it's odd to see a cat's grin linger long after the rest of it has disappeared, imagine how that looks in the reality where I'm appearing. I lost track of Alice after the altercation with the king and queen. There was method in my madness to materialize only my head in that dimension. Meanwhile, an equally confused crowd alternately contemplated my headless body. I have no idea what they thought, since Alice waited for my ears to appear before she spoke. I suppose her madness contained the most method of all. I hope she walked long enough. I hope she got somewhere.
Excellent. I love that. So many parts to remember to bring along. That's a great line. A Grin Without a Cat by Joy Stahl. Thanks for sharing that, Joy.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night. Okay, so that is the show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I've been a fan of David Mason for a long time, so it's nice to talk to him. That's the first time I've ever talked to him. And the prompt for next week... Oh, wait, no, you know what? There kind of is no prompt for next week. The prompt for 2 weeks from now, because next week is election night. And, I don't want to do a show on election night. That'd be weird. But what we're going to do is have the interview that I did back in June with Jan Beatty. Let me put that on screen here. This is next week's guest going to be, next week's guest going to be Jan Beatty, which is the interview that appeared in Rattle number 69. So if you subscribe to Rattle, you've already read it, but you can actually see how the interview came to be and how we condensed it down a little bit. But Jan talks about growing up as an adopted child, and it's for the issue that was a tribute to service workers. She worked as a waitress for a long time as she sort of launched her writing career. And that's going to be Rattle number 65 with Jan Beatty. But before we do that, I should let you know the next prompt the week after that is going to be here right on the screen. Write a concrete poem, a poem that takes a particular shape on the page. The content of the poem should have a connection to the shape. So, for example, I think in issue number 32, we have a poem that is it's called Darjeeling. I can't remember what it's called, but it's about tea, and it's shaped like a teacup. So it's the kind of thing that we're going to do. Hopefully the shape can sort of illuminate or like add commentary to what the poem is, but that's what a concrete poem is, a poem with a shape. So the theme for next week is write a shaped poem, a concrete poem. Any poem where the shape sort of adds meaning to the poem, the shape of the text on the page. There's another poem that we wrote, that we published. I can't remember who it's by, but there's a poet who does wonderful ones, and this was about the Grateful Dead, and it was shaped like a flame coming up. Who was it? I'll have to look that up later. But so the prompt for next week is to write a concrete poem, and that's actually going to be the prompt for 2 weeks from now, because next week there will be no prompt. There will just be the live premiere of my interview with Jan Beatty, which appeared in print in Rattle number 69, and you'll watch it live. She also read a few poems, and the same that we did in August with Paul E. Nelson. So Tuesday night, if you want to take a break from politics, tune in live to watch the interview with Jan Beatty on Rattlecast number 65. Hope to see you then, and good luck on the election and all of that. I will talk to you later. Good night.